Testing, testing. like to call to order the Committee on House Administration. I get my microphone set here. For today's committee markup, a quorum is present, so we can proceed. First of all, the meeting record will remain open for 5 legislative days so that members might submit any materials that they wish to have included for the record. And today we will consider 5 items in our markup. A committee resolution dismissing the election contest in the 43rd Congressional District of California. A committee resolution dismissing the election contest in the 9th Congressional District of Tennessee. The committee is also going to be considering H.R. 94, which prohibits the use of public funds for political party conventions. H.R. 95, which terminates taxpayer financing of presidential election campaigns and party conventions. And then finally, as well in the mark, will be H.R. 1994 under consideration, which is the Election Assistance Commission Termination Act. Our 2 election contest dismissals. First of all, I'd like to comment that both of these contests fail every test of validity. This committee has made a practice in the past of considering all contests under the Federal Contested Elections Act in public meetings to assure that they are treated fairly, and I hope that that commitment to full and fair considerations would not be jeopardized by meritless filings, as both of these 2 clearly are. Our next 2 items on the agenda, again, cover the Presidential Election Campaign Fund, the PECF. This committee held hearings in the 111th Congress that included testimony on the PECF, and the House voted on similar bills in the 112th Congress. And I think in light of what's happening with this fund, changing times as well, it's certainly appropriate for us to be revisiting this legislation today. The money in the PECF comes from taxpayers who are given the option to have $3 out of their taxes that they're already paying placed in the fund. Taxpayers, I think, are already voting to end the PECF, regardless of what Congress does here, because at its peak of its popularity in 1980, about 29% of filers actually participated in this fund. By 2012, however, that dropped to approximately 5%. So even though it doesn't cost them more in taxes, the American people are telling us that this is a program that they don't want. Since we started using taxpayer funds for presidential campaigns and party convention, supposedly to restore confidence in government, 20% of the American people actually think less of their elected officials than when we started. So no surprise that they don't want to pay for this failed program anymore. The PECF's popularity has certainly decreased amongst politicians as well. In fact, despite his stated support for this program, President Obama was actually the first major party candidate to entirely opt out of the program since it started. He did not participate in either the primary or general elections. Major candidates started refusing primary election money as far back as 2000. And in 2012, only 3 candidates applied for money from this fund. They were Gary Johnson, Buddy Roemer, and Jill Stein. So taxpayers don't support the fund, the candidates are not using it, and I think citizens don't have any more confidence in the government because of the program. So I'd say it's a textbook example of a failed program, one that we need to end. One part of the PECF pays part of the cost for nominating conventions for the major political parties, which are now 4-day extravaganzas that the major television networks don't broadcast in their entirety anymore. Last year, the RNC and the DNC received about $18 million each to conduct their party nominating conventions. I mean, that's $36 million in tax dollars spent for use by political parties. The parties themselves raised another $80 million or so in private money for their conventions. I would say that clearly the parties are up to the job of paying for their own conventions. They don't need taxpayer subsidies to help do that. And I think if they knew the details of what they were actually paying for, taxpayers would even be less happy about it. It was interesting looking at a review by Senator Coburn. The 2008 funds that were provided for conventions, the funds were used for things like floral arrangements and gift bags and live music and even makeup consultants. And this at a time certainly when people all over our nation are learning to get by with less. So I do not think as stewards of the taxpayer dollars in good conscience we should be spending taxpayer money on political conventions. H.R. 94 then would prohibit taxpayer funds from being used for party conventions, and I think it's at least a start there. H.R. 95 would eliminate the PECF altogether, use the remaining funds to pay down the deficit. Money that would have gone into the fund in the future will be available for other programs, and the $260 million sitting in that fund today will go straight toward cutting the amount of money that we would have to borrow, and actually reducing the deficit. Speaking of failed programs, I also think it's time for H.R. 1994, the Election Assistance Commission Termination Act, to end. It's far outlived its purpose, no longer benefits voters or election officials. And yet, despite an original sunset date of 2005, it continues to exist without any commissioners. My colleague from Mississippi, Mr. Harper, has led this mission to finally shut down this agency that has become a prime example of waste shielded by bureaucracy. The EAC has no more money to give out to states. Its research programs are completed. The voting system certification program that it runs is built around a model in a marketplace that has failed and needs to be really reimagined. The EAC hasn't even had commissioners or an executive director since 2011, and the country does not seem to be suffering as a result. In fact, the academic research that we've seen so far says that the operation of the 2012 election was really no worse than the 2008 election. Most of the problems that we saw certainly in the last election were from negligence at the local level. So there's just no need for this agency to exist. We need to shut it down. At this time, I'd like to recognize my colleague and the committee's ranking member, Mr. Brady, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have an opening statement. I do have a statement in front of each bill when we hear the bills, and we'll be offering amendments, and we'll do it that time.
Very well. Of H.R. 94 and 95, Mr. Tom Cole, concerning the Presidential Election Campaign Fund. And without objection, that would be so ordered. I'd ask if any other members have an opening statement. At this time, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Harper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's been more than 4 years since my first oversight hearing with the Election Assistance Commission as a member of this committee, and more than 2 years since I first introduced legislation to terminate the EAC. Since that time, the agency's actions, or lack thereof, has proven why the original bill did not go far enough in cutting this bloated agency spending. The EAC has proven, yet again, that it is not necessary to the conduct of federal elections. It is an unnecessary expenditure of taxpayer funds. The EAC initially had a 3-year mandate, but as with most government programs, it found a way to maintain its existence. Unfortunately, it has become a bloated bureaucracy that mismanaged taxpayer dollars and has been the subject of 2 discriminatory hiring lawsuits, both of which cost the taxpayers money to resolve. The remaining EAC functions, to the extent they are useful, can be performed more efficiently by other government or private entities. The best course that we can take as the EAC's Committee of Jurisdiction is to simply dissolve the agency and end its wasteful spending. The EAC has outlived its useful life. The commission was originally designed to distribute money and oversee the upgrade of states' voting machines. The EAC has distributed over $3.1 billion of money for states for machine upgrades and election improvements, and that stream of funding has ended. The EAC's testing and certification program for voting machines has been almost entirely left unused in recent years. The program only has 11 voting machines with current certification and 1 in the testing phase. The machines are still being tested to standards created in 2005. This onerous, costly program is outdated and stifles innovation in the elections community. Even more important, the EAC has not had enough commissioners to act and conduct business since December of 2010 and has not had any commissioners since December of 2011. The commission has also lacked an executive director since December 2011 and a general counsel since May of 2012, prohibiting them from conducting official business for the last 2 years. And the overwhelming majority of the country does not seem to have noticed. Yet despite its absence of any mission or leadership, the agency is still receiving an appropriation of $11.5 million. Wasting money on ineffective, useless agencies like the EAC is yet another example of irresponsible government spending. We need to finally put an end to this. This agency has outlived its usefulness, and to continue to fund it is the definition of irresponsibility. This is not a conclusion that we've come to lightly. We put in the time and effort through hearings and meetings with experts and election officials and come to the conclusion that this agency needs to go. NAS, the National Association of Secretaries of State, a bipartisan organization, adopted resolutions calling for the dissolution of the EAC in 2005 and renewed that again in 2010. It is simply the time to end the EAC and save the American taxpayers almost $12 million a year in a time when our nation is hurting financially. It doesn't get any easier to find an example of wasteful spending. If we can't do this, we might as well pack up and go home, because this is as obvious as it gets. Chairman Miller, thank you for your time, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Are there any other committee members wish to have an opening statement? The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Dr. Gingrey.
Madam Chairman, I want to thank you for calling this important markup on elections legislation. I am in strong support of the combined efforts by my good friends, Mr. Cole and Mr. Harper, to reduce federal spending by ending the public financing of campaigns and conventions and to terminate the Election Assistance Commission. As presidential campaigns in this day and age are becoming increasingly expensive and costing billions of dollars, the idea of having taxpayers contribute matching funds to them is ludicrous. Passage of Mr. Cole's bills to eliminate the Presidential Election Campaign Fund would immediately return approximately $260 million to the Treasury. Regarding H.R. 1994, I believe that the Election Assistance Commission has indeed outlived its usefulness. The Election Assistance Commission was designed to distribute money to states to make improvements to their election processes. However, the commission has not had a quorum since 2010. President Obama himself appears to believe the commission now has little value, as evidenced by his creation of a new entity to advise on elections. Eliminating the Election Assistance Commission is estimated to save taxpayers at least $10 million. Madam Chairman, in the midst of record levels of debt, we must scrutinize where every dollar of taxpayer money is being spent to ensure we are allocating these funds responsibly and delivering the best possible value to our citizens. I believe the bills we are marking up here today help to accomplish those goals, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Any other members have an opening statement? If not, at this time, I will call up and lay before the committee an original resolution dismissing the election contest for the 43rd District of California. Without objection, the first reading of the resolution is dispensed with. The resolution is considered read and open for amendment at any point. Let me just, first of all, say, in regards to both of these election contests, these contests are about as frivolous as election contests can be. Apparently, they're both sent by the same individual who's incarcerated, I think, in Tennessee. But we had the legal staff look back, and for about a century, we've really taken up even the most frivolous contests to the full House for dismissal in an effort to be fair and transparent. So again, we bring up these resolutions for the sake of the institution, not because either of them have any merit whatsoever. Is there any debate on this resolution? Any members want to offer an amendment to the resolution? If not, I move the committee favorably report the original resolution to the House. Questions on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Motion carried. In the opinion of the chair, it has carried. Without,
Madam Chair, I would like,
gentlemen?
I do agree with dismissing the frivolous and ridiculous election contest, but I'd like to announce that minority members will use 2 additional calendar days provided by Clause 2L of Rule 11 of the rules of the House in order to file views.
Very well. Without objection, thank the gentleman. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. And pursuant to Clause 2 of Rule 11, the member is entitled to 2 additional calendar days to file such views in writing, signed by that member, the clerk of the committee. I will now call up and lay before the committee an original resolution dismissing the election contest for the 9th District of Tennessee. Without objection, the first reading of the resolution is dispensed with. The resolution is considered read and open for amendment at any point. Any debate or amendments to this resolution? If not, I move the resolution, or the committee favorably report the original resolution to the House. A question is on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion is agreed to. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Brady.
Again, I'd like to announce that the minority members will use the 2 additional calendar days provided by Clause 2L of Rule 11 of the Rules of the House in order to file views.
Pursuant to Clause 2 of Rule 11, the member is entitled to 2 additional calendar days to file such views in writing and signed by that member with the clerk of the committee. I will now call up and lay before the committee H.R. 94, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to prohibit the use of public funds for political party conventions. Without objection, the first reading of that bill is dispensed with, and the bill is considered read and open for amendment at any point. Any members of the committee wish to comment on this bill? Mr. Brady.
Madam Chair, I urge the defeat of this bill. Both major parties have used public funds to pay for their nominating conventions since 1976. While I believe that paying for party conventions is not the best use of our tax dollars, I also believe that this legislation I do not believe this legislation is the best solution. We should reject it because we need a comprehensive fix to the way we finance presidential campaigns. Hopefully, this committee can have a hearing on the excellent proposal by Representative David Price to do just that. And I urge my colleagues to defeat this proposal. Thank you.
I appreciate the gentleman's comments. As I mentioned in my opening statement, I think when we think about $16 trillion and no end in sight worth of debt, the American taxpayers should not be really having welfare for politicians or political parties running infomercials for presidential campaigns. I think that this bill is long overdue. Any other members wish to comment on this bill? Any members want to offer an amendment to the bill? Mr.
Madam
Brady.
Chairman, I have an amendment which has been distributed to the members.
And the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to
Thank you, Madam
talk
Chairman.
to his amendment.
My amendment ends the use of public funding as well as use of soft money contributions for nominating conventions. We should not eliminate public money for party conventions, only to replace it with undisclosed contributions from special interests. My amendment institutes a hard money system subject to contribution limits. My amendment is based on a proposal by Representative David Price from North Carolina, who has been a leader in this area for a long time. My amendment is also a common sense replacement for the current system, which is in desperate need of reform. This is an important first step that provides more accountability and disclosure in how we finance our conventions. I ask you for your support of this amendment.
I would say to the gentleman, since we just received the amendment just a little bit ago, we haven't really had a chance to completely digest his amendment. I'm very interested in our overall goal of stopping taxpayer financing to these kinds of things. But if the gentleman is interested in working with us, I think we would be willing to do so. If you're interested in withdrawing that amendment, I certainly would commit to the gentleman that I'd be willing to look at this in depth, and perhaps we can come to some agreement before we go to the floor with it. I would certainly be open to that with the gentleman.
Madam Chair, I'm always interested in working with you, and with that, I will withdraw my amendment.
I thank the gentleman. Are there any other comments or any other members that want to offer an amendment to this bill? If not, I would move that the committee favorably report H.R. 94, and the question is on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Motion, in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Brady.
I'd like to announce that the minority members will use the 2 additional calendar days provided by Clause 2L of Rule 11 of the Rules of the House in order to file reviews, and I thank you.
Again, to the gentleman, pursuant to Clause 2 and Rule 11, the member is entitled to 2 additional calendar days to file such views in writing and signed by that member with the clerk of the committee. I would now call up and lay before the committee H.R. 95, a bill to reduce federal spending and the deficit by terminating taxpayer financing of presidential election campaigns and party conventions. Without objection, a first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill is considered read and open for amendment at any point. Are there any debate or members that wish to offer an amendment? Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Madam Chair, I urge also the defeat of this bill. Created in the wake of the Watergate scandal, the Presidential Election Campaign Fund was designed to restore integrity to our presidential elections. Since 1976, presidential candidates on both sides of the aisle have opted to fund their campaigns using PECF instead of private contributions. Like convention funding, all money used for the campaign funding functions of the PECF is contributed voluntarily by taxpayers. We should honor the wishes of those taxpayers. Beginning with the Citizens United decision, we have seen a disturbing pattern of increasing influence of large and undisclosed monies in our politics. Terminating the only public finance system at the federal level runs the risk of handing over our elections to special interests entirely. The system needs reform, not repeal. By modernizing the system, we can ensure that Americans continue to have a voice in the process, no matter how small their contribution, and I also urge my colleagues for that to defeat this bill.
I thank the gentleman. Are there any other debate, or does any member have an amendment to the bill?
Madam Chair, I have an
Gentleman
amendment
from Pennsylvania.
in the nature of a substitute what has been distributed to the members. Presidential elections see dramatic increase in turnout compared to midterm elections, overburdening election officials and creating unique problems, particularly for our most vulnerable voters. The amendment reserves a small portion of the presidential election campaign fund balance for the Elections Assistance Commission to approve elections, administrations, and presidential election years. By checking the right box on their tax return, millions of taxpayers voted to have their money used in support of federal elections. This amendment adds another goal to the presidential campaign fund by working with the Elections Assistance Commission to make sure soldiers, students, and disabled voters have access to the ballot. While the presidential election funding system needs reform, we cannot be distracted from our duty to make sure every eligible voter gets to the polls, and this proposal helps make this happen. And I urge your support for my amendment.
I thank the gentleman for offering the amendment, and in this case, I would say I will be opposed to the gentleman's amendment. I appreciate the spirit in which it's been offered. I think, as has been pointed out, if we pass this, we actually return approximately $260 million back to the Treasury at this time. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, when you look at the history of the participation for this particular fund, you had almost 29% back in 1980 of the folks that were participating in it, and by 2012 you had about 5%. And again, in the 2012 election cycle, no viable major party candidate accepted either matching funds for either their primary or their general. So I do think that this is a good bill, and again, I think it's appropriate for us to consider it. I'll be opposing the gentleman's amendment. Any other comments about the gentleman's amendment? Gentleman from Mississippi.
I'd just like to speak in opposition to the amendment. I have certainly great respect for Mr. Brady, but I just believe that this would be an attempt where we would be rewarding bad behavior. It's clear, whether it's NASA, National Association of Secretaries of State, and the fact that that bipartisan group not once but twice has said that we need to end it. This is, in effect, perpetually funding the EAC, and we don't need to go that route. And of course, we're all very sensitive to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to vote. And I believe Mr. Brady's intentions are well meant, but I believe that the EAC should not continue. These are matters that can be handled by the localities and the states. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I associate myself with his remarks, particularly when we think about voting for our military members. Again, I appreciate the spirit in which the amendment has been offered. As we all know, the DOD is currently they have been undertaking, and we're hoping for a report here shortly about military voting, at which time, I think that was due at the end of May or the beginning of June here, but that should be happening shortly. We'll have an opportunity, all of us as a committee, to discuss and most probably have a hearing on that particular report as well, in regards to how we make sure that all of our military members are able to exercise their franchise to vote in a timely way, and one in which they are counted. Any other comment about the amendment? The gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Chairman, thanks for the recognition, and I too am opposed to the gentleman's amendment. not the spirit of his amendment, of course, but here are some of the reasons why, from the policy perspective, I would oppose it. I think it's already been mentioned that you could call this the Election Assistance Commission Perpetual Life Amendment, because the amendment converts $10 million per year from the Presidential Elections Commission Fund to the EAC, and then this amount is actually indexed for inflation. This makes mandatory appropriations for the EAC not subject to the regular appropriations process. So the amount is reserved for improvements in ability to vote for members of the uniformed services, elderly individuals, and individuals with disabilities to cast ballots in such elections. Mandatory appropriations will reduce oversight of the EAC. The EAC has been the subject of harsh bipartisan oversight from both Democrat and Republican chairmen of this committee. The EAC has fulfilled its purpose. This amendment seems to be repurposing the commission just so that they have something to do. I do appreciate and share Mr. Brady's desire to help military and elderly voters, but this commission isn't the group to do it. Why would we ask the EAC with military voting, why would we task them, why would we task the EAC with military voting when we have the Federal Voting Assistance Program? And given the EAC's recent mismanagement of resources, what assurances would we have that they'd even be able to provide assistance to these groups? So for that reason and others that I've mentioned, Madam Chair, I too oppose the amendment.
I thank the gentleman. Any other comments, questions by members? If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman to H.R. 95, and all those in favor of the amendment will signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed will signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chairs, the noes have it, the amendment is not agreed to. Are there any other amendments? If not, I move that the committee favorably report H.R. 95 to the full House, and the question is on that motion. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Oops. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Brady.
I announce that the minority members will use the 2 additional calendar days provided by Clause 2L of Rule 11 of the Rules of the House in order to file views.
Appreciate gentlemen. Pursuant to Clause 2 of Rule 11, the member is entitled to 2 additional calendar days to file such views in writing and signed by that member with the clerk of the committee. I now call up and lay before the committee H.R. 1994, a bill to terminate the Election Assistance Commission. And without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with. The bill is considered read and open for amendment at any point. Are there any comments or debate in regard to the bill?
Madam
Mr. Brady.
Chair, thank you. This is the 3rd attempt to terminate the EAC since the outset of the 112th Congress. And on this matter, I don't believe the 3rd time is a charm. I have opposed this proposal before, and I oppose this bill today. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Any other comments or debate on the bill? Any members want to offer an amendment to the bill?
Madam Chair.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Madam Chair, the arguments in support of EAC are well known, and it is the only federal agency tasked with assisting state and local elections officers to ensure their federal elections run smoothly and cost-effective. This is an important and valuable role of the federal government to play. My office has received numerous letters, phone calls, and emails from elected officials of both parties from all across the country in support of the EAC and its work. It's a commission worth reauthorizing, and in a few minutes I'll offer an amendment to do that. My colleagues should once again reject, This argument support is well known and the only federal agency, and it is a commission worth reauthorizing, and in a few minutes I will offer an amendment to do that. My colleagues should once again reject this proposal.
I appreciate the gentleman's comments about the bill. I think both myself and certainly Mr. Harper have articulated a number of reasons why we believe that elimination of the EAC is necessary. I will just note that the National Secretaries of State, which I was a member of at one time back in the day, as well as Mr. Rokita, adopted resolutions calling for the dissolution of the EAC, both in 2005 as well as 2010. Again, in calendar year 2013, over $11 million have been appropriated for the EAC, money which I think can be used in a much better fashion. At this time, I would ask if there are any amendments to this bill. Gentleman from Pennsylvania. And without objection, the amendment will be considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to speak on his amendment.
Thank you. This amendment will authorize the Election Assistance Commission to allow the agency to continue their important mission. Additionally, calls for EAC to determine the extent of which our polling places are accessible for disabled voters and ensure all voters can cast a ballot. The amendment also tasks the EAC with determining the most cost-effective method to administer elections, as well as methods for increasing the cost-effectiveness and value of the agency itself. Finally, this amendment will result in more transparency in the testing and certification of voting machines by establishing an escrow account that prevents machine manufacturers from paying directly to the laboratories, ordering their machines, and making information about the testing and certification results available to the public. This amendment continues the important mission of the EAC, which is to help America vote and making sure every vote is counted. And I would ask my colleagues to support this amendment.
I thank the gentleman for offering that amendment, and certainly, again, in the spirit in which the amendment was offered. I would just, again, comment, we just received the amendment. I'm a huge 10th Amendment person. I think most of us are, and it appears, at first blush looking at this amendment, that you're actually giving the EAC more power over the states, shifting the burden from the states to the EAC, so it's sort of making the EAC more powerful. I'm not sure that it makes it more efficient. Again, I don't think we need the EAC at all, and we certainly don't need to give it anything else to do at this time, so I will be opposing the gentleman's amendment. Are there any other comments to the gentleman's amendment? Gentleman from Mississippi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's interesting that it was stated that it is designed, the EAC is supposed to help the states and localities be cost effective. And that's rather ironic because the Election Assistance Commission would be the poster child for wasting money and not being cost effective. They've done such things as double their employee size in the last 4 or 5 years without any new responsibilities, not to mention the Inspector General reports that contain such information about spending $7,000 worth of taxpayer money to buy employee shirts for morale. I mean, come on. And then you look at other issues on spending and things that they've done, and the 2 discrimination cases against them that had to be resolved and settled and paid out in taxpayer funds to resolve those. It's just the mismanagement is such. We don't need to be expanding their work or keeping them, and I think we do need to go back, despite that history, and look at the fact that the bipartisan group, National Association of Secretaries of State, have looked at this agency that was supposed to last for 3 years after HAVA, and it's now has gone on for, I guess, more than 10 years now, with no real end in sight. So this is a chance to do that, so I ask to vote in opposition to this amendment. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I would also comment about the EAC. Really, they did have their purpose originally. When the Congress was appropriating all this money for HAVA, over $3 billion that was shoveled out the door to all of these various states for equipment, you had to have sort of a distribution point, somebody for accountability for that. So I do think the EAC had its time and its place. But I think, again, it's long outlived its usefulness. And I would even just make a personal observation, listening to the President's State of the Union when he constituted this National Elections Committee to study what has happened and some of the best practices and worst practices in how elections are being administered in some of the states. He never mentioned the EAC. He never gave them any responsibilities in that, and here you have a staff. You have they already have housing. They've got an office here in D.C. so they're staffed up and they have an office space, and yet the president, in his comments, never mentioned them or sought to utilize them in any way. So again, I just think that they have outlived their usefulness, and I will be opposing the gentleman's amendment. Are there any other members that wish to speak to the amendment? Gentleman from California.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I would like to support the amendment made by the ranking member. I think all of us remember the huge lines in this last presidential election. In fact, it was rather striking. On television, there was a gentleman who was an elderly veteran who had been standing in line for hours attempting to vote. And he said that he had gone and put his life on the line and had fought for the opportunity to vote. And yet it was so difficult. It seemed that they made it purposely difficult for him to cast his vote. And that shouldn't happen in America. I mean, you should have the right to vote. A person, especially a veteran who's disabled, went and fought for a country, should expeditiously be able to go and to vote his conscience for whomever he's going to vote for, whomever she's going to vote for. I had the opportunity in 2000 to be an international observer to the Mexican election when Vicente Fox became the first person to defeat the established party there, the PRI. And the shocking thing for me was the size of the lines to vote. I mean, I think in Mexico they purposely made it difficult to vote so one party would stay in power. At least that's what it seemed to me from as an observer, and the lines were incredibly long. And yet that's exactly what we saw. You know, in a developing country, you see those lines, and you think, well, they don't have the technology, they don't have the money, they don't have the assistance. But to see those types of lines in America is outrageous. I mean, we have to do something about it, and I think that that's what the amendment attempts to address, and appreciate the amendment. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman, and I think we all watch those lines on TV, and my personal reaction to it was amazement that that was still happening. It's sort of amongst the usual suspects, I will say. This is my personal opinion. Florida, some places here in the district, in Virginia. I mean, in my state of Michigan, we didn't have any stories like that. In your state, they didn't have any stories like that. There were a couple of places that had those stories, and I believe, as a former election official, as soon as I saw that, I thought, well, first of all, there ought to be accountability of the election supervisors locally that were running those elections. I was pretty sure that it was because they hadn't adequately trained their election inspectors, their precinct workers. They didn't have adequate amount of election equipment out there numerically for the demographics that they were servicing within those precincts. They just didn't have enough election equipment. And also, I'm listening to some of these news reports where they were saying, I think it was in Florida, trying to remember exactly where they were talking, that they had 11 pages on a ballot or something because of all of these, and we have a member from Florida here, because of the ballot questions that were on there. I mean, I can't even imagine going through page after page after page reading these ballot questions, and I'll yield to the gentleman in just a moment. But I know in most states, you have your elections commission or whatever go through and summarize very quickly, but yet getting the intent of what the ballot question is, not the entire language of that. And yet, so again, I'm not sure that when I saw the president appoint this presidential commission, in my opinion, I think you ought to hold the election officials who are running those elections accountable. And in the state of Florida, that's actually what happened, because the governor went to the Secretary of State and said, look at this is not right, and we ought to have somebody look at it, make recommendations, which the Secretary of State in Florida did do. I know it's up online. I was reading it. Essentially, many of the things that I brought forth and others that they found were exactly what happened there. Again, I'm a 10th Amendment person. I think it's up to the state. And I'm happy to yield to my friend from my colleague from Florida for any comment about that as well.
I thank the chairman for that. And Florida, unfortunately, has had been in national news on a couple issues over the years on elections. But when you look specifically at the areas, one was that ballot initiative, the constitutional amendments to the Constitution, 11 pages, which absolutely slowed the process down immeasurably. I mean, it was overwhelming. But if you look, and I think you mentioned the usual suspects. But if you look in particular, the one county that it occurred in the worst, that supervisor election, it wasn't a Republican supervisor election. Supervisor elections within the counties have great latitude in control of their elections in regards to staffing and how they, the number of locations they want to open up. Just in my home county, the new supervisor election, who is now a Republican, who actually was one of my employees down in the district, got elected. She's already increased the number of locations and hours to actually handle those types of issues, so you don't have people disenfranchised to have to stand and wait. Because I can remember just early voting, driving by and seeing the lines are so long that you'd wait till the lines went down, and they never did. So, I commend it. It really is a local issue. It is a state issue in regards to how they set those up. And you're right, the federal government doesn't do a good job anyhow as it relates to those state issues. And so the Election Commission, never did that to start with, and wasn't challenged by the president to do that. So I absolutely support.
Just one other comment. I was watching Florida in particular, but in Michigan, we don't have either no reason absentee voting or early vote. And I've often been told that if we had both of those things in Michigan, we would really expedite the process. But yet I notice in your state you have both of those things. I just point that out.
They've
so again,
gone,
I think it points to the local election supervisor.
They've gone out of their way in regards to absentee voting. At one point in time, you had to have a reason. Now you don't. And anybody can absentee vote. They encourage people to absentee vote or early vote. So I think they've made a lot of accommodations trying to get more people the access to vote. But a lot of folks still want to go in there and blacken the mark and put their mark on it. So,
Absolutely. Well, I think we are certainly all in agreement of free, open, fair elections, and having long lines like that there's no reason for it in today's time. No reason at all. And I'd recognize the gentleman from Indiana, former Secretary of State, Mr. Rokita.
I thank the chairman. I'm struck by Mr. Vargas's statements. First of all, I'd like to say that in my years as an election official, I never knew one election official that didn't want the best for their voters, that didn't want an accurate outcome, not an equal. We wanted someone to win one way or the other, okay? We didn't necessarily like recounts, but we wanted a process that not only that we could be proud of, given our profession, but that people would have confidence in. The reason I'm concerned about the comments is because for some reason this is an amendment about the EAC, and this is an amendment about making the EAC more powerful. Actually, not necessarily more efficient, but bigger and more powerful than it already is. And like the gentleman from Florida says, it exists here and now. It didn't solve the lines in Florida, nor would it, nor will it ever, no matter how big or how powerful it becomes. So that's one thing. And I also like to echo the comments that were alluded to a little bit earlier by the chairman and the gentleman from Florida, in that I don't know how it is in Mexico, but in all states, you can vote by absentee ballot. Some have, I wouldn't call them restrictions, I think that's too strong a word, but qualifications. And in the gentleman's example, even if that gentleman wasn't from Florida, where he didn't have to have an excuse at all to vote absentee by mail, let's say, he would have fit the qualification in Indiana because of his age and because of his disability. So the idea that he might have been in a line, albeit unfortunate, was his choice. And at some point we have to have parameters and rules to our election process, or else we have chaos. And so I think Florida has gone beyond what it really has to do in allowing people without any excuse whatsoever to vote absentee, but that's their choice, and that's the good thing. I don't know anything about the ballot initiative being 11 pages, but I think that's unreasonable, and that probably contributed to the lines. But that doesn't mean there's a systemic failure. And it certainly doesn't mean that we need to make this government agency that hasn't performed well at all, whose reason for existence in the first place has been met, that we need to repurpose it or make it bigger. And by the way, I'm not here to trash or beat up on EAC as an agency or any of the people in it, because I think the attitude and the problems demonstrated by this little baby agency, Ms. Chairman, is really just a microcosm of the attitude and pervasiveness of and some of the problems that we have across all agencies. And we only have to look to a hearing going on in another part of the House side of this Congress to see the effect of that attitude, of that sloppiness, of that bias. And I will say on the record, I was a victim of EAC bias during one of their reports that caused an Inspector General investigation that called into account and clearly exposed that attitude. So it exists, it's out there, and the last thing we need to do with respect to the author of the amendment is make this agency or any agency any bigger or more powerful. What do I mean by more powerful? This amendment, as I understand it, removes the AAC, just one example, removes the AAC from OMB oversight under the Paperwork Reduction Act, so there's no control over what information they demand from the states. And I think that is absolutely the wrong way to go. I'll close by just saying that the gentleman from Mississippi used the word ironic when talking about the purpose of this amendment and how it would make the states more efficient. I think the word better suited to my experience, at least, as Indiana's chief election officer for 8 years, is offensive. The states may not be perfect. By definition of the word human, Ms. Chairman, no one is perfect. But everywhere I saw, at the state level and local level, all of us wanted to get it right. And we wanted to get it right for this free republic, above all else. And to say that some overseers here in this town are going to make sure we do it better is, I think, going to be intolerable for nearly all, if not all, of our state brothers and sisters. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman for his comment. Gentleman
Madam Chair,
from
could I just
Pennsylvania.
make a quick comment? I don't know just how much authority, and I looked into it when I was chairing this committee, we have to agree with my friend from Indiana and Florida by saying we make elections fair, but not only in the state, but in the country. In the state of Pennsylvania, we do have restrictions, no qualifications on absentee ballots. We have no early voting. You have to be 65 years or older. You have to have a doctor's certificate, which is a little inconvenience from time to time, and you have to either show proof that you're out of the state to be able to vote absentee ballot, which is not unlike, and I wish we had the same rules that Florida and Indiana had, with the early voting, which we don't have either. And it would be maybe, I would love to try to look into making all things equal throughout the whole United States. I mean, to make every state fair and have every state have the exact way how they can vote. And to throw out one agency that does show a little bit, or maybe supposed to, if they don't, maybe we can reform instead of throwing it out, that has a little bit of teeth into putting some type of penalty of people that do violate it. We had lines in Pennsylvania, not only in New Mexico, you know. I could not imagine, and I do chair the party in the city of Philadelphia, and I do have to run elections there to the best that I can and as much as I can. I could not imagine having 11 constitutional ballot questions on the ballot. I mean, that is somebody's mistake somewhere. I know I wouldn't have fired the person, no disrespect, I would have shot him for putting that on the ballot. I mean, but I would like to maybe, again, I'm saying this in the spirit of maybe in cooperation where we can have every state have the same exact qualifications of early voting, absentee voting, and this way it makes it fair for people from Pennsylvania, people from New Jersey, people from Florida, Indiana, wherever you're from. And maybe that's something along with I kept trying to look into, and we'll continue to look into. Maybe my staff can, maybe we can figure out a way to make that happen. The fairness in all elections is most important to all of us. So thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Any other questions yet, comments? Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Chair, thank you. I am in opposition to the amendment, and to a large extent, we're here to represent the voices of our constituents, each of us approximately 700,000, and the voices of our state government, being firm believers in the 10th Amendment and that which rules best, rules closest to the people. And our Secretary of State has made it abundantly clear to me that this amendment is not necessary, and that the EAC indeed has outlived its usefulness. Some of the comments made by my colleague on the other side of the aisle, whom I have great respect for, in regard to, let's say, making everything equal, think about the Voting Rights Act, a piece of legislation that was abundantly necessary when it was passed because of egregious behavior regarding voting in certain states across the country, and indeed a lot of those states were in the Southeast. But here we are 50 years later, these states that, and one of them is mine, the great state of Georgia, far beyond that, and yet we're under the Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act for another 25 years. So much for making everything equal. Why not make that applicable to all 50 states rather than just 13 and parts of a few more? This Election Assistance Commission, I was just told by my colleague a few minutes ago, while there are no commissioners, they're still leasing office space at a tune of $1 million a year. Now, if you were having to pay rent on an empty office space at a tune of $1 million a year, and you were a small businessman or woman, you'd be a little bit concerned about that. So this amendment does not reform the EAC, it expands it. It includes no reforms or efficiency. What it actually does is it reauthorizes it through 2018. It forces states to submit information the EAC asked for in post-election surveys. It removes the EAC from OMB oversight under the Paperwork Reduction Act, so there's no control over what information they demand. It gives the EAC more power over states. It shifts the burden from states to EAC. Why? It is bad. It does not address any of the real problems at the EAC. It makes the EAC more powerful, not more efficient. And we don't need the EAC at all, and we certainly don't need to give it more to do. It has nothing to do now except pay a $1 million a year rent for empty office space. I'm opposed to the amendment, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Any other members wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? If no more comments, we'll vote on the gentleman's amendment, and the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania to H.R. 1994. Those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Those opposed will signify by saying nay. Nay? No? In the opinion of the chair, the nays have it, the nays have it. The amendment is not agreed to. Are there any other amendments? If not, I move that the committee favorably report H.R. 1994 to the House, and the question is on that motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I ask that the minority members will use the 2 additional calendar days provided by Clause 2L of Rule 11 of the Rules of the House in order to file views.
I thank the gentleman. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table, and pursuant to Clause 2 of Rule 11, the member is entitled to 2 additional calendar days to file such views in writing and signed by that member with the clerk of the committee. And for all of the matters that the committee has considered today, I would ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make technical and conforming changes if necessary. Without objection, so ordered. And this concludes today's markup. The meeting for the markup is adjourned. Appreciate the interesting debate and for all of the members. And as you know, we are now prepared to begin our hearing for H.R. 2115. And if the witnesses will please come forward to the table. We spent a little more time in the markup than we thought, but we are delighted to have them here. We'll begin the hearing portion of our Committee on House Administration regarding H.R. 2115, the Voter Registration Efficiency Act. And first of all, let me announce that the hearing record will remain open for 5 legislative days so that any members that want to submit any materials for the record may do so to be included therein. Again, a quorum is present, so we can proceed. The purpose of our hearing today is to discuss the need for a simple legislative fix to the National Voter Registration Act that would assist states in their efforts to maintain up-to-date and accurate voter lists and hopefully reduce some of the administrative costs associated with identifying duplicate registrations in multiple states. And in doing those things, H.R. 2115 will also increase confidence in our election by making it less likely for voters to be registered in more than one state at a time, whether that's by accident or whether that's by intent. And obviously, if a voter is not registered in more than one state, it's much less likely that they'll be able to vote in more than one state. According to a February 2012 study commissioned by the Pew Center of the States, 1 out of every 8 registrations in the United States are inaccurate, and approximately 2.7 million people have active registrations in multiple states. As those figures show, these problems are not imaginary. In 2004, the New York Daily News examined voter registrations in Florida and New York City, not even the whole state, just in the city, and they found about 46,000 people were registered to vote in both states and 400 or more who had actually voted in both. That same year, the Cleveland Plain Dealer found 27,000 people registered in Ohio and Florida and about 400 who had voted in both states. Because of these findings, states have taken steps on their own to try and reduce double registrations. Kansas actually initiated a cross-state matching program that my state of Michigan and Secretary Bennett's state of Arizona both belong to, that is designed to help identify people registered in multiple states so that the voter rolls can be corrected. Another program called the Electronic Registration Information Center has many other purposes, but it also helps its member states to identify double registrations. Even with programs like this in place, double registration and double voting is still happening. In fact, just last year, a candidate for Congress, actually, in Maryland, was charged with illegally voting in both Maryland and Florida in 2006 and 2010. This was a candidate for Congress that voted in 2 separate states twice. Finding double registrations is only one part of the process. The next step is removing any of the registrations, and as Michigan discovered when it was sued for trying to eliminate double registrations, the NVRA makes that both difficult and expensive. As a former secretary in Michigan, I'm certainly no stranger to the challenges election officials face when trying to comply with Section 8 of NVRA, the section which requires each state to implement some form of a list maintenance program that keeps the voter registrations current. I was very aware of these challenges when I left office back in the day, 2003, and since then, we haven't seen the much-needed updates to NVRA, which is now 2 decades old. And this is occurring when a time when nearly every state really is up against severe budgetary constraints, further challenging their ability to administer elections, no less implement list maintenance programs. It was a challenge, as I say, years ago, and I'm sure it has not gotten any easier for the secretaries and election administrators in those states. And today we're here to listen to our witnesses about their experiences with list maintenance and the tools or information that they need to keep their list current. I'm especially interested in hearing their feedback on this bill that we're considering today, H.R. 2115, which Congressman Rokita and I introduced to help assist states with this mandate. The Voter Registration Efficiency Act is simple. It requires new state residents who are applying for a driver license to notify the state of their intent to vote in that state. If so, the previous state of residence is notified, and then the lists are updated accordingly. The NVRA requires motor vehicle offices to offer voter registration. This bill would go one step further and hopefully save states some time and money in their efforts to keep their lists accurate. Obviously, the foundation of our democracy is the fundamental right to vote, as we just had this very large debate here during the mark as well. And the Constitution tasks each state with the immense responsibility of administering and protecting that right. And as we seek ways to help the states, we must keep in mind their challenges and avoiding costly mandates that inhibit their ability to protect the integrity of our system and instead try to find ways to alleviate those burdens. This bill, again, I think serves to do just that. And I do believe we can agree certainly on two things. All eligible voters should have the opportunity to vote, but just one time in any election. And our state election administrators should be given every tool to allow them to protect the integrity of the process. I believe this legislation is going to help provide states with just such a tool to ensure more accurate qualified voter lists and to preserve the integrity of our electoral process. I certainly appreciate both the witnesses coming, all three of the witnesses coming, and I will be making a more formal intro in just a moment. But I would at this time like to recognize my colleague and the ranking member of the committee, Mr. Brady, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And thank you for holding this important hearing. I appreciate the chairman's work in linking state voter registration processes to apply for and renewing driver's license. In 1993, Congress enacted the National Voter Registration Act, better known as the Motor Voter Law. While Motor Voter has registered thousands of voters who may not have registered otherwise, it is not perfect. Congress should strengthen Motor Voter in many ways, such as what is proposed here. The legislation we are considering today is a welcome start to improving the administrations for elections for Americans. I ask that in consideration of this legislation, we examine the inclusion of some sort of fail-safe voting procedure to ensure this bill results in no disenfranchisement whatsoever. No American should lose the right to vote because of a clerical or bureaucratic error. And I thank you, Madam Chairman, again for holding this very important hearing. I look forward to the testimony from our witnesses today.
I thank the gentleman very much. Any other member wish to give an opening statement? At this, excuse
Madam
me.
Chair.
Yes, gentleman from Florida.
Just briefly, I just want to make a point when you start talking about duplicate voters, and once again, Florida stood out when you brought that up. But back in 2004, there was a New York Daily News article that indicated there was 46,000 New Yorkers that were eligible to vote in both New York and Florida. And so I think that anything that we can do to strengthen, like you say, one vote per person. I came from Chicago, and it used to be, vote early and often and dead vote twice. But we want to make sure that one vote per person, and I think this goes a long ways in ensuring that. So with that, I yield back. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. It's interesting because when you come from a state like Michigan or New York, Pennsylvania, whatever, we all like to winter as we get older in Florida, and that's apparently what's happening with this dual voter registration. So we think this bill will be an easy way to assist the respective states. Let me just take a moment to introduce our witnesses. First of all, Secretary of State Ken Bennett, we welcome you so very much, sir, to taking time to come and talk to the committee. The Secretary was appointed by Governor Jan Brewer to replace her as Secretary of State. He's been serving there since 2009, served 4 terms in the State Senate from 1999 to 2007, served as Senate President in his final 4 years, served as Republican floor leader in 2002, was Chairman of the Senate Education Committee, and prior to joining the legislature, Secretary Bennett was a member of the Arizona State Board of Education for 7 years, President of the board in 96 and then in 98, and he also served on the Arizona Charter Schools Board for 3 years and was a founding member of the Educational Leaders Council in Washington, D.C. So we welcome you very much, Secretary, for coming. Appreciate it. Chris Thomas actually has been our elections director in Michigan since 1981, not to date you. We're dating ourselves here. He served under 4 different secretaries of state, including myself, and certainly continues to serve under our current Secretary of State, Ruth Johnson. And I would just say this sincerely. He is the go-to guy, I think, nationally on elections. And I don't just say that because you happen to be sitting in front of me. I think that is widely known by NAS, the National Association of Secretaries of State, and now I know you're the president of NASED, the National Association of Election Directors. And many of the improvements that have been made in Michigan, secretaries of state like to take credit for, but I'll tell you the brains behind most of it really has been Chris Thomas. He's got a great vision for how we keep our elections open, free, and fair, how we make sure that every person who is eligible to vote is registered to vote, how we can do a better job all the time on increasing participation from all of these who are eligible. And I would just point out, that was sort of interesting. You actually began your career, I think, on this committee back in the day. Back in the day, I won't mention the year. Back in the day, and then went on to the FEC, et cetera, et cetera. So again, we just appreciate you coming, Chris, and look forward to your testimony on this. And our third witness, Miss Elizabeth McNamara, we certainly welcome you to the committee. We appreciate you taking the time to come here today. Ms. McNamara is the 18th president of the League of Women Voters in the United States, chair of the League of Women Voters Education Fund. She served in this position since 2010. She joined the League in 1983 and has since served in leadership roles at all levels. In '84, she joined the board of directors of the DeKalb League, serving as courts, criminal justice chair, education committee chair, vice president, secretary, et cetera. Has been president of that league as well, and she joined the board of directors of the League of Women Voters in Georgia in 1999, served as president of that board beginning in 2001, et cetera. A long distinguished career, and we certainly welcome you. Welcome all the witnesses as well. We have received your written testimony. All the members do have that. And at this time, the chair would recognize Secretary Bennett for his testimony. And the floor is yours, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I am Ken Bennett, Secretary of State from the state of Arizona. I never really anticipated being the chief election officer of my state, but have been such for the last 4.5 years. Arizona has about 6.5 million residents, about 3.2 million registered voters. We about 36% Republican, about 33% independent. We have a large independent group of voters in Arizona, about 30% Democrat. Happy to be here to testify on this legislation. Arizona supports this legislation. In fact, we've supported it so much, we've been doing something very similar to it since about 2008, 2009. We were one of the first 7 states that joined the Interstate Cross-Check program, where we began sharing our voter data with 7 other states. That has now grown to 22 states. And once an election occurs in Arizona, we share our file as to who voted, obviously not how they voted, but who voted. We share 4 pieces of information: their last name, their first name, a date of birth, and the last 4 digits of a Social Security number. In our most recent cross-check, which was done on the votes that occurred in the 2012 election, the 22 states, including Arizona, shared about 84 million records of voters who had voted in those 22 states. Obviously, that would have been much more if it were nationwide, but essentially we do this voluntarily at no cost to any of the states to help ensure that our voter registration files are as current as they possibly can be. Of the data that was shared in 2012, we had over 45,000 duplicate records affecting voters in Arizona that came back to us from those other states. Typically, if we didn't have this program, we would wait for another 2 federal election cycles for NVRA to kick in and for those 45,000 to eventually be removed from our rolls. But this allows us to, after checking and making sure that the matches are in fact hard matches, there's a soft match and a hard match process. We take very seriously when a match occurs, and each one is checked and verified, and otherwise we would have waited perhaps 4 or more years for the removal of those duplicate registrations. This program is not unlike what we really do in our state as a part of HAVA. Our office, as the Chief Elections Office, serves with our statewide voter database to allow the counties to communicate with each other. In Arizona, we have 15 counties. County recorders oversee the voter registration in Arizona. We have 8 Democrat county recorders, 7 Republican recorders, but they work very closely together. And just since HAVA came into being in Arizona and throughout the country, we have processed over 670,000 duplicate registrations as people move from one county to another, over 300,000 death records, over 75,000 court records. So it's an important part of how we maintain current and up-to-date voter registrations within our state. H.R. 2115, I think, would be a very positive step forward in causing that same type of interaction and communication between the states, between our motor vehicle record offices, and then their contact back to the chief election officials in the counties from there. Obviously, the main goal of this legislation is to enhance the accuracy of our voter registration records throughout the country, but I think a side benefit would be to deter duplicate voting. Because of this interstate cross-check program that we've been running in Arizona, in the first cycle, after we shared data with the other states, we had about 10 couples that, or probably about 15 individuals, because there were some couples and individuals that were found to have voted in Arizona and another state. We had a couple that voted in Kansas and Arizona, 2 individuals that voted in Colorado and Arizona, and 1 couple that voted in Nevada, Arizona, and attempted to vote in Kansas. So we are using this information to deter that, and actually in these cases they are being prosecuted. The last thing I'll say, I see my time is short, is it's very critical, and I applaud the legislation that it keeps the notification process away from a one-size-fits-all type of an approach. And we would be happy, as a member of the National Association, myself personally, as a member of the National Association of Secretaries of State, to offer our organization or sister organizations to help make sure that the details of how the notifications go from state to state are worked out. But I'll be happy to answer any questions as we get into those details, if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Secretary Bennett. At this time, the chair recognizes Chris Thomas from Michigan, State Election Director, for his testimony.
Good morning, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to be here before you at the helm of this committee. And I must say that I enjoyed working with you for your 2 terms as Secretary of State in Michigan. We did great things for Michigan's election system during that period. And I also extend Secretary Johnson's greetings to you and members of the committee. I thank you and Congressman Rokita for introducing this bill and holding a hearing on 2115, the Voter Registration Efficiency Act. I believe it is appropriate to make sensible adjustments to the National Voter Registration Act as we celebrate the 20th anniversary of this good law. This amendment to the NVRA adds 1 new requirement. The Department of Motor Vehicles will ask an applicant for a driver's license whether the applicant intends the new state to serve as his or her residence for voting purpose. Currently, DMVs require every new applicant coming from another state to surrender their driver's license from their former state of residence. Every state has a good reason to ensure that drivers don't have multiple driver's licenses in their wallets or purses. Further, the DMVs inform the former state of residence of the surrendered driver's license. The problem addressed by this legislation is the unnecessary retention of voter registration records of individuals who have left the state and applied for a driver's license in their new state of residence. The vast majority of these voters who have moved from one state to another have no intention of remaining as a resident of their former state for voting purposes. In fiscal year 2012, we had over 73,000 individuals who reported to Michigan as having moved to another state. Under current practices, these individuals must remain on our qualified voter file for 2 November federal elections after a cancellation notice is sent to them. They may remain on the file for as long as 4 years after the notice is sent. To be clear, there are instances where an individual who makes a temporary move to another state is required to apply for a driver's license, even though the individual is not relinquishing his residence in the former state. Both the NVRA and the Help America Vote Act have as their purpose the improvement of the accuracy and integrity of voter registration files used in federal elections. Retaining tens of thousands of non-residents on our voter registration files does not further the purpose of either federal law. H.R. 2115 would leverage the relationship established by the NVRA and HAVA between election officials and motor vehicle administrators to make voter registration files more accurate by permitting the removal of records of voters who have moved to another state and have affirmatively stated to the DMV that they now reside in the new state for voting purposes. In the conclusion of a 2008 federal court case in Michigan was that a voter may reside in one state for driving purposes and in another state for voting purposes. The court found that states do not determine whether applicants moving to their state are intending the new state to be their residence for voting purposes. An affirmative statement that the new state is the residence for voting purposes was a necessary requirement under the court's reasoning. Recent federal legislation and interstate driver license compact all have a similar requirement in regard to residency: one license, one record. The Federal Real ID Act of 2005 prohibits a Real ID driver's license applicant from holding more than one Real ID driver's license. Further, the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators has adopted a common sense policy: one license, one driver control record. Michigan, like all other states, has implemented this policy through the state vehicle code. In summary, H.R. 2115 requires the DMV to ask new applicants two questions. The first is already being asked: did the individual reside in another state prior to applying for a license? The second is new: does the individual intend the new state to serve as the individual's residence for voting registration purposes? Under the amendment, the DMV will attach an indicator to the list of those who have surrendered their license that is already being sent to the former state of residence. The indicator could be as simple as yes or no under the column heading "Residents for voting purposes were now licensed." The residence information will then be transmitted to the state election official, thus providing confirmation from the applicant necessary to retain or cancel the voter registration. This amendment is a common sense adjustment to the NVRA that protects voters of only making a temporary move to another state while enabling states to more efficiently manage their voter registration file for the vast majority of applicants who are making a permanent move to a new state. I thank the committee for the opportunity to testify on this amendment and personally thank Chairman Miller for introducing the legislation. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman for his testimony. At this time, the chair recognizes Ms. McNamara for her testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chairman, members of the committee, I'm very pleased to be here today to voice the League's support for the basic goal of H.R. 2115, providing a mechanism to ensure that voters are not registered in more than one state, and to make some suggestions for avoiding possible unintended consequences that could result from the legislation as currently drafted. The Census Bureau reports that approximately 4 million individuals aged 16 and over moved from one state to another between 2011 and 2012. Though we are not aware of solid data on the number of voters who moved from one state to another, certainly a significant number, has been indicated here this morning, have done so. Thus, H.R. 2115 aims at a worthy goal. We are concerned, however, about the specific mechanisms of the bill. Our concerns come in 4 areas. First, the mechanism will likely result in inaccurate removals. 2, it could interfere with the motor voter registration process. 3, it is technologically outdated rather than modern, efficient, and cost-effective. And 4, the legislation does not deal with a larger but similar problem. In our view, these are all surmountable problems. The mechanism in H.R. 2115 will likely result in erroneous removals of properly registered voters because of inaccurate data for matching individuals to voter registration records without adequate safeguards. For example, errors likely will be introduced under H.R. 2115 at multiple steps, beginning when the Motor Vehicle Authority in one state copies the data from the applicant's paper application form and sends it to the second state's Motor Vehicle Authority. The best way to improve accuracy would be to require for the data be handled electronically. The benefits of electronic transfer are demonstrated by the fact that many states are already providing for it. According to the Brennan Center, at least 23 states currently or will soon have fully or substantially automated voter registration at DMVs. When the voter registers or updates their information at the DMVs, the information is electronically transmitted to election officials. In addition, the Help America Vote Act already requires states to maintain their lists on a statewide computerized voter registration list. In any case, it is vitally important for the legislation to make adequate safeguards to prevent incorrect removals. The best way is to provide written notice to the voter, as in the NVRA. But H.R. 2115 does not seem to maintain this fundamental safeguard for interstate movers. We are also concerned that the current mechanism in H.R. 2115 could interfere with the voter registration process. But again, this is a solvable problem. The motor vehicle registration application form under the NVRA is simple, clear, and unambiguous. H.R. 2115 is currently written, however, adds 3 new requirements for applicants to answer that will likely result in erroneous rejections, as well as confusing the applicant and providing ambiguous or inconsistent information to election officials. Under H.R. 2115, even if the applicant is fully eligible to vote and fully and correctly fills out the motor vehicle form, failure to answer any of the 3 questions could result in a rejection because of these new requirements. In addition, by requiring duplicative information, the draft legislation creates confusion for the applicant. For example, the motor vehicle form already requires the intent to register in the new state. That's what an application is. By requiring the intent question to be answered a second time, the legislation simply confuses. In addition, the requirements add ambiguity for election officials. What if, for example, the applicant provides apparently conflicting answers? What happens if the applicant indicates he or she does not intend for the new state to serve as the voting residence, but still fills out the motor voter application form? The most effective way to reduce confusion and ambiguity is to modify those elements of the proposed legislation that are duplicative of the current processes under the NVRA. Much of the information from the driver's license applicant required in H.R. 2115 is already included on the National Voter Registration Application Form under the NVRA. The purpose of H.R. 2115 could be fulfilled by requiring information from the motor voter application to be transferred to another state where the applicant was previously registered to vote in another state. The Census Bureau also reports that nearly 23 million individuals moved within a state between 2011 and 2012, and with approximately 5 million moving from one county to another. And I see that I am running out of time, but would be happy to answer questions about our concerns about interstate moves. The League looks forward to working with you further on this legislation, and thank you very much.
Thank the gentlelady very much for her testimony. I thank all of you for your testimony. I've just taken a couple of notes while you were talking here. The gentlelady mentioned about the electronic registrations, et cetera. 23 states, which I have a list of all the different states here, but I will just mention in Michigan, again, I am mostly familiar with Michigan, more so than obviously the other states, but we, I think, were the forerunner of the electronic registration, what we still continue to call the qualified voter list, which was an incredible product, really, and I don't say that without some prejudice, but I will note that we were noted in the Ford-Carter Presidential Commission report as a national model. And in Michigan, unlike many other states where usually the counties operate the voter registration rolls, in our state, it's every city, every village, every township clerk, to the extent that we have almost 1,800 various voter registration lists that were individually maintained previous to our qualified voter file. And once we did that electronically, and it was a little bit easier for us, I will agree, than other states, because Michigan is one of only 3 states in the nation where the secretary is also the motor vehicle administrator. I think it's Michigan, Illinois, and Maine, I believe, are the 3. So the motor voter had its genesis in Michigan. So we had we had the data already. We had the database already, but we went through our file and eliminated 750,000 registrations once we were able to electronically meld this in our state and dedupe all of that. And one thing that we also did, I'm just mentioning this because I think it has some bearing on why we introduced this bill, trying to help make sure that these lists are always up to as clean as they possibly can, and using technology, I think, to the advantage of the voters, et cetera. We also passed a bill that said we don't care where you register to vote, but your voter registration address must match your driver address, wherever that is. That deduped an incredible amount, as you might imagine, even from the college towns in particular, where I'm always of the impression that if you're smart enough to go to college, you should be smart enough to get an absentee ballot and vote AV. That's a criteria that is allowed in Michigan law. But again, it really helped, I think, clean up the list to make sure that we didn't have duplicate registrations across the state, because people are moving a lot, particularly college students as they're going to college as well. And Mr. Thomas mentioned that driver's licenses right now can't be duplicate in various states, and that is all through the database shared by AMVA, I suppose. And so that's an important thing as well. And also mentioned that 73,000 people moved just in the last year, and yet you are required. In our case, in our state, I'm not sure how many moved from, a lot of us moved to Arizona. Unfortunately, hopefully we're going to stop that. But we keep our folks in Michigan, but a lot of people do move, and yet we're required under the current law you can't take those off the list for at least 2 years, maybe 4 years, which just does not seem to be a very good practice. As well, I guess my question, I would first start with Secretary Bennett. Our whole impetus for this bill when we introduced it is to, again, make it as easy as possible for the secretaries, for all the voting administrators to expedite their process, keep it free, fair, and open. Is there anything that you would see in this particular bill that might cause that not to be a better situation, or an expense as well?
Madam Chair, I don't see anything. I think the points made by Ms. McNamara are cogent and can be considered as this legislation moves forward. I think some of the concerns about, you're already asking one question, why ask it again? I think the points made by Mr. Thomas are that the first ask of the question, whether it's on a paper form or electronically, can serve as the question proposed by 2115. So I don't see anything here. Arizona is not one of the states that has motor voter under the Secretary's office, but because we were the first state to do online voter registration, and most of our citizens who do so coming through from our motor vehicle department. We have very close ties with them, and I don't see anything in the legislation that's going to complicate that or make it more expensive.
Really, I would think that that's not particularly inherent to Arizona. It would seem like in every state you'd be much more likely to go to the DMV or the Secretary of State's, whatever the case is, to change your driver license address before you think about your voter registration. Really, that at least has been our experience, I think, there as well. And one of you, I think Mr. Thomas, mentioned about Real ID, which I was involved with. And I also sit on the Homeland Security, I'm the Vice Chair of the Homeland Security Committee in the House here, and I tell you, before we're anything, we're Americans, and your identification, driver license in particular, is your foundation of identification. You're using it to get on an airplane or to do anything else. So having good safeguards there, and then working with voter registration as well, is just such a natural transition, I think. So I just appreciate all of you coming. I think this bill, if we can get it to the floor and get it moved, does have the potential to be a real step forward. I hope it's going to be embraced by the Secretaries of State as well nationally, and the election officers as well nationally. My only other question before my time expires here is just curiosity. I was thinking as you were talking, Mr. Thomas, what has been the experience in Michigan, and I'm not sure if other states are talking about utilizing new technology, the electronic poll books, and how would this impact that, if at all?
It impacts, definitely will impact the Kansas project, interstate cross-checks. It really eliminates errors by election officials in terms of scanning voter history. So the electronic poll books are far more accurate, and what we have seen already is that when it shows somebody when they have voted, there's very little question whether that's accurate data. So that has proven to be very beneficial. And in terms of looking at what can be done with the data coming from the DMVs, you know, they use driver's license numbers for all their matching criteria. So when that comes back to Michigan, it comes back with a driver's license number. And in some cases, the states even make a copy of the license and send it back to Michigan. So that makes a very accurate match then in terms of which voter has moved out of state. It is not does the name and the birth date, are all those accurate? It really goes number to number, which is a very efficient way to do that.
So regardless of how an individual votes, whether they vote absentee, whether they show up at the polls or what have you,
Right.
it really should assist.
Yes.
Thank you. At this time, the chair would recognize the ranking member, gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My only, I guess, question would be that I understand from state to state, change your driver's license, you get taken off the previous state, which I happen to support and agree with. Would it make any sense to have some registration materials, maybe mandatory, provide that they have some registration materials that you're being taken off a state, giving them the opportunity, not mandatory naturally to register, but giving them the opportunity with the materials there that they can register right there, to register in their new state. Anybody?
Go ahead.
Well, Congressman Brady, that is the law. The DMVs are mandated by federal law to offer voter registration opportunity to every single person who comes in and either renews or applies for a new driver's license. So when that person moves to the state, they should be asked. Now, if you go and look at the figures that are come out every 2 years that the EAC publishes, unfortunately, I think it shows that not all states are doing that equally. When you start seeing the percentage of registrations far below 50% coming out of the DMV, then some serious questions need to be asked whether those DMVs are really offering voter registration opportunities. And that's really more of an enforcement question. So what I like about this bill is it says, look, we're going to ask you this question, and we're going to be mandated to ask the question, is this your state for voting purposes, whether or not you register to vote? But I certainly and sincerely hope that those DMVs, the next step in that application process, is offering that person the opportunity to register.
When you ask the question that you want to relinquish your ability to vote in the previous state, is it mandatory that you ask him at that time? We do have materials here that allow you to vote in the state that you register for your driver's license.
It seems like a reasonable time to ask that. Different states do it at different points within their process. But really the question is not so much, are you rejecting your former state? The question is this your state that you're applying for a license for? Is this your state for voting purposes? And if they answer yes to that, it seems to me the next obvious question is, well, here, would you like to register to vote? And we're going to sign you up right now on the spot. And that's the way it should be done.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Brady, if I could, I think that question is one of the concerns that the league has. No matter how well educated you are, a lot of folks do not understand our election process. It's complex. It varies greatly from state to state. Our concern with asking the question, is this the state that you intend to register to vote in, is that what is implied in that is that you can choose whether or not the state of your residence is the state that you want to vote in. My son just recently moved from Virginia back to Georgia and had to go in and apply for a driver's license. He just graduated from medical school, and he's had a lot of exposure to elections through his mother. I promise you, if you'd asked him that question and he thought he would have had to call me and say, does this mean that I have an opportunity to say, I would rather leave my registration in the state of Virginia and move my driver's license to Georgia? That's what we're concerned about, is that that's going to be confusing for voters. The mere fact that they're offered the opportunity to register, choose to register on the NVRA application should be sufficient evidence of intent, because you are applying to register to vote in the state to which you are moving. And so we would just suggest that in achieving this very worthy goal, that question could be very confusing.
How would you pose the question?
I would suggest that everyone is supposed to be offered under motor voter the opportunity to register at the motor vehicle office. There are applications available for that. If you fill out that application, I think your intent is obvious. You are intending to register to vote at that time through the DMV. Asking the additional question, I do think we would suggest that you leave off the additional question and make the requirement that if the person fills out the motor voter registration form, that is evidence of their intent that can then be sent back to the state where they were registered. And we would also suggest that be done secretary or election official to election official, as opposed to having everything go from one DMV to an election official, from the DMV to another DMV to another election official. Because we see, since all states aren't doing this the same, we do see a lot of opportunity for transcription errors and matching errors that could make it difficult for election officials to determine whether or not they're taking the right person off the list. So that would be our suggestion. Let's streamline the process. Let's use the NVRA, the motor voter registration form, as your indication of intent.
Yes, sir.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Miller, at the same time that Ms. McNamara's concerns point out a concern about whether that question is going to confuse somebody, I think it also represents an opportunity to see in the legislation how this could help people who, whether they're just graduating from college. I talk to a lot of people in Arizona who assume that when they move their driver's license, that it automatically moves their voter registration.
Sure.
And that is not necessarily the case. And what this legislation will do, I think, in a very positive way, is cause all of the states to at least go through that process, whether electronic or in paper or in front of a person, and reinforce the concept that the voter needs to make a decision of whether they want to be registered in the new state. As Mr. Thomas pointed out, it's not so much do you want to give up your registration where you were previously, but it is a wonderful opportunity and will cause all of the states to ask voters, who I think many of them now assume that by moving my driver's license, my voter registration is going to automatically follow. And this will help them understand that that's not necessarily the case. And if we ask the questions in the right way, which I think the legislation can be constructed, and with the assistance of organizations around the country to implement it correctly, will have a very positive effect on many voters who find themselves in that situation.
Thank you. If I have any other further questions, we will submit to you in writing, and I do want to be supportive of the bill and support our chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, co-sponsor of the bill, Mr. Rokita.
I thank the chair. Appreciate the discussion here regarding the intent and versus confusion. Using just a little bit of my time, I'd like Mr. Thomas to chime in on this subject more specifically. You may have touched on it a little bit earlier, but go ahead. Based off these two excellent witnesses, how would you referee their differing viewpoints?
Well,
since you're unelected.
Yes, I am unelected and nonpartisan. It's a great bill, and I think you ought to pass it.
But you are a politician.
No, I think it asks the right question, and I don't think, there's always room for confusion, obviously, but this is a straightforward question. Is this your state for voting purposes, yes or no? And if they say no, the question was asked by Ms. McNamara in her testimony is, well, what would happen if they don't answer it or they answer no? Well, then, particularly if they say no, then we won't take any action. They will be presumed to stay on the file in Michigan, and we won't send them a notice and spend that money, where now they surrender that driver's license, we're getting that notification, and we're sending them a notice. And if they happen not to vote in those next two federal elections, we're canceling them. Whereas if this voter is saying, no, I'm not moving to this state for voting purposes, we're going to leave them on the file. And if they don't answer it, then we'll just use the regular NVRA process and send them a notice.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. excuse me, Mr. Thomas, and I didn't mean to cuss at you by calling you a politician. I apologize for that. Want to thank the witnesses for being here. Very instructive. Appreciate it all. I would like to, Madam Chair, indicate for the record that re-emphasize for the record that the National Association of Secretaries of State, I believe, have just offered to help with the particulars about the process and the details. And I know by personal experience, as do you, that they do it. They can put together committees in a very bipartisan, if not nonpartisan way to accomplish that. And I think as this bill moves forward, we ought to take them up on that without objection, if that could be noted.
Without objection.
The time I have remaining, I want to focus on my friend Ken Bennett's remarks when he talked about, I think, Ken, when I was still a Secretary of State, it was called interstate compacts or some kind of agreements that we had to have state by state to share the newly organized statewide voter registration data. Is that what you described in your testimony, an outcry of that, or is that the same kind of concept that we were dealing with?
Madam Chair, Congressman, I was coming into my role as Secretary of State about the time you were leaving, so I don't know that I was using...
You mentioned there's 22 states now.
Yes, and we call it the interstate cross-check.
Okay.
It wasn't so much a compact in the formal sense of what I would interpret compact to mean, but it had just been originated by the previous secretary, now Governor Brewer. Her office had joined with the 6 other states, and it was just a voluntary program to share our data to see if we were having duplicate voters.
Thank you. I want to unpack that because I want to see how this bill would impact other states going into that.
Okay.
And then I'll have Mr. Thomas comment. Do you have any demographics on these states? Are these states, these 22 states, is the chief election officer an elected official? Are they secretaries of state? Are they more blue states? Are they more red states? And if I'm looking like you don't have that answer, can I ask NAS through you to provide?
We can get that information to you and the rest of the members of the committee. I'm sure we have that data.
And we'll look
get
for
that
what drives states, the 22, which is a big number from where we started, but only half the total number,
right.
Roughly. What drives that? And Chris, if you want to comment as well, Mr. Thomas.
Yes, the driver is, again, trying to clean the files up, and we've participated in 2010 and 2012. And in the combined number, now this is the gross number that's not been worked out, we're over 300,000 duplicate records across these 22 states.
So the fact that this legislation, if enacted, would be a requirement on every state, which, as you heard from the earlier part of today's proceedings, I'm sensitive to, would a silver lining in this legislation be more states entering into these compacts, or to get the job done, or not?
I think so. I think it would be worth their while to do it, and this would sort out of the 300,000, I'm sure half of them are people that have moved and they're just sitting on our files because we've sent the 2 notice and have to wait the 2 federal elections. Okay. So if we can move them off and leave them where they are now permanently, where they've moved, then this cross-check really kind of gets down to the nuts and bolts of what's left, and that's the serious stuff.
Thank you. And in the 20 seconds or so we have left, Ms. McNamara, you the bell or the light ended your testimony. Is there anything else you want to get on the record?
Well, yes, then thank you very much.
And now you're out of time. Really quick, if in 10 seconds or so, if you want to.
Right. We'd also like the committee to consider the interstate or intrastate moves. An awful lot of folks move within their state and are completely unaware that they need to re-register in most states in order to keep their registration active. And so if we are looking at electronic ways, if we are looking at compacts, if we are looking at ways to make our voting rolls more accurate, certainly we would like to focus the committee's attention on the fact that many, many more folks move within a state than move between states, and that is also can be a barrier for voters.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman, and I certainly thank all the witnesses. And as the gentleman was mentioning about NAS or NASED really helping with the questions, I mean, the whole impetus of the bill is to make sure that people are not duplicate registrars, right? They're not registered in 2 different places. It would seem that part of the question could just be you do understand you can only be registered to vote in one place.
That's it.
So pick your place, right? Only once, so you can only be registered in one place. I just throw that out as a NAS, and NASED might be looking at this. There might be a way to phrase a question that would answer your concerns as well, I think. So with that, I certainly, again, want to thank all of the witnesses. I think this is this bill, maybe not perfect, but I think we can make it work. And I'm appreciative of the support that we've received for this bill. We look forward to reporting it to the House. And with that, I would, without objection, I would mention that all members will have 5 legislative days to submit to the chair additional written questions for the witnesses, which we will forward and ask the witnesses to respond to promptly as they can, so that their answers may be part of the record. And with that, the hearing is adjourned. Thank you all again.